Hello and welcome. We are with Mr. Ifor Williams, the CEO of Cluster Navigators. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been traveling around some industrial clusters in Maharashtra. What is your observation?
Well, firstly, let me say it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to come from New Zealand, and this is an eye-opener for me. And what you've got in the state are clearly a large number of clusters that have occurred naturally, that have grown naturally over time. And what I'm seeing now are facilities, particularly to improve and to upgrade the technology of some of those clusters. I visited, as you call it, the auto cluster of the Detroit of India, Pune. And there is a very good cluster facility there. And it's a good facility providing technical support. But what I see in other parts of the world are such facilities providing more general business development support. And such facilities also providing leadership for the cluster as a whole, and leadership that importantly is driven by the private sector. So whilst the organization might be publicly funded, and ideally publicly funded long term, it's an initiative that is driven by business for business with public support.
So do you find like a lack of perhaps the hub and spoke model in India, where you have one large industry which is driving industrial clusters in some way?
It's not so much a lack, rather it is, we've already got this in place. We've already got this technical incubation, this technical support, particularly for SMEs, but it's also being used for companies like Volkswagen. So we've already got that in place. So now what's next? And what's next particularly in lifting our competitiveness? And what I see in many parts of the world is a one-stop shop. A one-stop shop, it's technical support, but it's also business support. Perhaps it's also providing support on markets, particularly international markets, perhaps support on training as well. So I see a number of different pillars of support, but also an umbrella organization across those pillars, and an umbrella organization that importantly is business driven.
So, if you were to compare industrial clusters that you've visited in India to perhaps some of the clusters abroad, how would you rate them, and what's the scope for growth of clusters here?
You've got tremendous competencies here in the state, across India. And the benefit that you've got, and it's a benefit that we don't have in New Zealand, because we're only 4 million people. The benefit you've got is a huge home market. But at times, it can put the blinkers on. And the blinkers on in the sense of what we focus on is the home market full stop, rather than the export market, the international market. And for us in New Zealand, that's really where we start straight away. So perhaps because you've got it a bit easy with a large home market, it restricts the appetite, it restricts the information flow, particularly on, well, what are the opportunities internationally? And as I look at many of the clusters across India, and they proudly come up with numbers that show this proportion of India's output comes from our cluster, 70% here, or maybe it's 80% there. When I look at the clusters in China, they are able to say, usually straight away, we account for so much of world production. So I sense in China straight away it's more engagement with the outside world than so far what I'm picking up here in India.
Do you think that Indian clusters are more inclined towards the domestic market because they are not as competitive in the global world in terms of pricing?
I'm not sure that it's a lack of competitiveness.
Okay.
I think rather, can I use the word lazy? There's a danger perhaps because we've got a large market that we can easily service with no hassles in terms of different currencies, no hassles in terms of ports and other things. We've got a large market on our doorstep. Wow, isn't that nice to have? But what we see around the world are places that are global suppliers. And what we see around the world are places that have got their local act together. And a local act together in a triple helix sense, where it is business, but it is also government, different public agencies, and it's also academia. And I'm thinking in academia, it's not just universities, it's also technical training. Or it could even be the high schools, where high school kids in Pune are doing subjects that relate to automotive engineering. So straight away as kids, they're aware of, well, this could be a career opportunity for me. So what I see elsewhere in the world is much more triple helix engagement, as it's described, that is particularly, and I put business in the center here, that is particularly business driven.
But do you think that Indian clusters are now at that inflection point where they can actually take the next big leap forward as far as being a part of the global market is concerned?
It's non-negotiable. You don't have the opportunity to decide should we or shouldn't we, because if you don't take the next big leap, then someone somewhere in the world is going to be moving into India. It's as black and white as that. You have no option but to take the leap. You've got no option but to think about moving from, how do we move from being a domestic supplier to being a global supplier? And often, as firms, as clusters go through that journey, we move from having a product range and activity that is that wide to narrower and narrower specialization. And as the specialization develops, then the market that we're servicing perhaps moves from Asia maybe to the world.
And what are the, if you were to list out the top three things that that Indian clusters need to do to tap this opportunity that you're talking about, what would it be?
I think you need to clean the spectacles in the sense of having a better understanding of the outside world and being more comfortable in engaging, a better information flow, better understanding of how to access international markets. And I sense there's an opportunity for more university, more technology inputs and more partnerships, where particularly universities are able to listen to what are the needs of those firms and able then to respond to those needs, instead of universities being up in an ivory tower and having their dreams in the ivory tower.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.